They all turned and looked the moment I stepped in, like someone had just tracked mud into a cathedral. My name is Leah. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Naperville, just outside Chicago. I walked into the museum that night wearing a modest burgundy cocktail dress I'd borrowed from my neighbor, trying to keep my head up. It was my cousin Clarissa's engagement gala, an over-the-top, silk and silver kind of event that made me feel like I'd shown up with coupons to a black tie auction. The place was stunning. A private wing of the Field Museum, closed off and transformed for the occasion. String quartet playing near the bones of a reconstructed T-Rex, chandeliers flown in from somewhere European. Guests in designer gowns and champagne flutes balanced like trophies. And then there was me. I knew what this was, not a celebration, but a show. Clarissa, the golden niece, marrying some minor European diplomat whose name sounded like a luxury cologne. And me, the reminder of everything they'd rather forget. Is that Leah? I thought she wasn't invited. No, she was. Out of obligation. The whispers slid past my ears like razors. I didn't need to turn to know it was Clarissa and her circle, decked out like magazine ads, smiling without kindness. Clarissa looked me dead in the eye and gave a little wave, the kind you give to someone working valet. I scanned the room for someone, anyone, who might acknowledge me like I belonged. Nothing. Not even from my Aunt Sylvia, who'd held me when my mom died, or my Uncle Paul, who used to sneak me candy at Christmas. All eyes slid past me like I was part of the exhibit. And then came the toast. Clarissa's father, Russell, my uncle, took the stage. Real estate mogul, loud laugh, louder opinions. His suit probably cost more than my car. He held up his glass and did the usual. Praises, love, family, destiny. People laughed, clinked glasses. Then he spotted me. And of course, he said, his voice dropping into something that barely passed for amusement, "It's good to see everyone here tonight. Even our more distant relatives. Those who remember how quickly fortunes can fall when bad decisions get made." I froze. People were watching now. Russell smirked. "Leah, sweetie, I'm surprised you could make it. Your father's company left quite the legacy. Unpaid debts, lawsuits, a pile of rubble with our name on it. But hey, you clean up all right." A pause. "Your mother would have been proud." The room tensed, the fake smiles warping. He stepped off the stage and walked right toward me. I tried to back up, but my heels betrayed me. He took my wrist. Not rough, but tight. "What's this?" he said, lifting my arm like a prop. "An antique? From her things?" I nodded before I could stop myself. "This old thing?" He let out a loud chuckle. No wonder everything fell apart. And then he yanked it. The bracelet snapped. A gasp ran through the room, collective and sharp. For a second, no one moved. The tiny opals scattered on the marble floor like teeth, and my wrist felt suddenly bare and burning. I stood there, stunned, arm half raised, like I could still feel her hand on mine. And Russell just turned away. Just walked back toward the stage, drink in hand, as if he'd done nothing more than clear a table. No one stopped him. Not Clarissa. Not her fiancé. Not the cousins who used to braid my hair when we were kids. I didn't cry. Not yet. But the damage was done. I had come to the gala out of duty, to show I could still hold my head up. And now I stood under a glass dome in front of 100 people who saw me as a punchline. Just another exhibit in a museum of people too wealthy to care. I was still frozen in place, staring at the shattered bracelet pieces on the floor, when I heard someone say my name. "Leah." I turned my head and saw him. Damien. He was cutting across the room with that quiet, deliberate intensity he always carried, not rushing, just moving like he didn't need to make space because the world would move around him. His suit wasn't flashy. Navy, perfectly tailored. No bow tie, no pocket square, just him. And that was more than enough. The whispers started again. "Is that? Oh my God, that's Damien Shaw. Wait, I thought he was in Singapore?" People moved aside as he passed, and I don't think they even realized they were doing it. Damien didn't smile. He didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge a single person until he was standing right in front of me. "You okay?" he asked, gently reaching for my wrist, the one still red from where Russell had grabbed it. I nodded, but it was a lie. I didn't know how to speak. He looked down, saw the scattered stones from the bracelet, and his jaw tightened just slightly. That was the only sign. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But I did. "I'm sorry," I whispered, ashamed for reasons I couldn't even explain. "Don't be," he said, eyes still locked on mine. "They did this, not you." I could feel the weight of the room shifting, eyes peeling off champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres, landing on us. And then he turned, slowly, deliberately, and faced Russell. The crowd parted as Damien walked up to him. Russell had just taken another sip of his scotch when he noticed. His face went from smug to startled to something just short of defensive. "Damien, isn't it?" Russell said, trying to puff himself up. "Didn't realize you were on the guest list." "I wasn't," Damien said, voice even. But then again, some things are worth interrupting. There was no heat in his tone. Just something so level it made people stop talking. Russell laughed, too loud. "You know, it's a private function. Family only. Don't want to make anyone uncomfortable." Damien tilted his head just slightly. "Funny. That didn't stop you from humiliating your niece in front of 100 people. Russell's eyes darted, calculating. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was making a joke." Damien reached into his jacket pocket, calmly, like he was pulling out a phone. But instead, he produced a thin envelope. Legal-grade paper. Sealed with a private crest I didn't recognize, but the shimmer of it made the hairs on my arms rise. He handed it to Russell. "What's this?" Russell asked, already uneasy. "Open it." Russell hesitated, then tore it open. His eyes scanned the page, and suddenly, all the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he said again, quieter now. "Some kind of prank?" Damien didn't move. "That's the title transfer. As of yesterday, the museum, this wing, specifically, is under new ownership. Mine." Gasps this time. Real ones. From people who'd been too polite to react earlier. Now they couldn't help it. Clarissa stepped forward, her expression tight. "That's not possible. This is a private-public partnership. It's protected." "It was," Damien said without even looking at her. "Until an overseas holding company acquired the controlling interest from the Preservation Trust. Took me about 6 months, all things considered. Your fiancé's father probably knows the name." Clarissa's fiancé, the diplomat, looked visibly uncomfortable now, like he wanted to shrink out of frame. Russell barked a dry laugh. "You expect me to believe you bought a museum just to what? Make a point?" "No," Damien replied. "I bought it because I don't tolerate people humiliating my wife in buildings they don't even own." And that was when the room went silent again. "My wife." It echoed. Clarissa blinked like she'd misheard. Russell's mouth opened, then closed. "Twice. You, married?" Russell managed, eyes flicking toward me, like he'd forgotten I existed until that second. "You married him?" I stepped forward, finally finding my voice. 6 months ago. Private ceremony. We didn't think you'd approve of the location, courthouse, not a yacht." Somewhere behind me, I heard someone mutter, "She married Damien Shaw," like it was breaking news. Damien reached out and gently laced his fingers with mine. It felt steady, real, like an anchor in the middle of a storm I didn't know I'd been in until he arrived. Russell shoved the envelope back toward him. "I don't care what piece of paper you have. This doesn't change anything." Damien raised an eyebrow. "It changes everything." He looked around then, not at Russell, not at Clarissa, but at the whole room. The guests, the socialites, the influencers, the bankers and boutique owners and legacy family friends. "You all saw it," he said, voice still low, but now with a kind of cold clarity that made the room tighten. "A woman invited to a family event, mocked, insulted, assaulted, and not one of you said a word, not even when her late mother's keepsake was torn off her wrist." Silence. He let the words sit there. "I've worked very hard to become invisible in this world," he continued, "to make sure my money doesn't have a name attached to it. But tonight?" He looked at Russell again. "Tonight, I'll make an exception." He turned back to me. "We can go if you want. Or stay. Entirely up to you." I looked around at the faces. Suddenly no one could meet my eye. Not Clarissa. Not my aunt. Not the girls in their glittering heels who'd been whispering about me since I walked in. "No," I said, finding something in myself I hadn't heard in years. "I want to stay." Damien gave my hand a small squeeze. Then he leaned down and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Good. Because we own the place now." And just like that, everything shifted. The room didn't go back to normal, not really. There was no recovering from what just happened. People were still pretending to sip drinks, fiddling with canapes, but their eyes kept darting toward us. You could practically hear the recalibration happening inside their heads. The woman they'd laughed at? The one Russell had humiliated? Turns out, she came with a silent tycoon who just bought the museum they were standing in. I could feel it. The shift. "Is it true?" someone whispered behind us. "Shoot, don't stare." But they were. Even as they tried to act casual. Clarissa looked rattled for the first time in her life. Her champagne flute trembled just slightly in her hand as she tried to keep her practiced smile. I stepped forward with Damien beside me, not hiding anymore. Uncle Russell wasn't speaking. He just kept staring at the document Damien had handed him like it might catch fire. And that's when Damien turned toward the room again. But this time, he wasn't just addressing Russell. He was addressing all of them. "I came here for my wife," he said calmly, like he was starting a business pitch. "But I stayed because this isn't the first time Leah's been treated like she doesn't belong." People stiffened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You all saw what happened tonight. But let's be honest, the problem started long before this party. You laughed behind her back. You whispered when she entered the room. Some of you even encouraged it. Nobody denied it. Not out loud. Not with the looks on their faces. Her mother died without dignity in your family," Damien continued. "And you turned that into a ghost story. You all loved talking about the scandal. About how her father ruined everything. How Leah didn't fit in. But you never once asked what that did to her. What that did to a child." Silence. Clarissa's father finally tried to cut in. "I think we've all had enough moralizing for one night, Mr. Shaw. This is a private event, not a courtroom." Damien looked right at him. "I don't believe we've met," he said coolly. "You're Clarissa's father, correct? Venture capitalist?" "Yes," he said, already bristling. "Then you'll understand this," Damien said, pulling a second document from inside his jacket. "As of this evening, your firm has been blacklisted from my fund's investment rotation. Permanently." The man blinked. "Excuse me? No future rounds. No access. No equity partnerships. And given how reliant you are on our referrals for Series B expansion capital, I imagine your next quarter will look thin." He handed him the paper. "Feel free to review the details with your general counsel." The man's face twisted. "You can't." "I can," Damien said, "and I already did." I stood frozen for a second. I hadn't expected that. Neither had anyone else. There was an audible gasp, followed by murmuring. People started pulling out phones, texting under the table, checking names, connecting dots. That was the thing about Damien. He didn't just speak with authority. He was authority. Clarissa's fiancé looked like he wanted to evaporate. I took a breath and felt my spine straighten. I wasn't hiding behind him. I was standing beside him. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the poor cousin in the borrowed dress. Damien turned to me and reached into the inner pocket of his coat. I didn't know what he was doing until I saw the small velvet box. He opened it quietly and held it out. Inside was a necklace. Diamond, but delicate. Elegant. With a center stone that shimmered like a clear night sky. I didn't touch it. "I know what that bracelet meant to you," he said softly. "I can't replace it. But I can give you something new." I hesitated, not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't want them to think this was about money. He must have seen that in my eyes, because he added, "Not as a display. Not for them. For you." I nodded once, and he gently clasped it around my neck. Gasps again. But different this time. I heard someone whisper, "It's Harry Winston," like they'd just seen royalty walk in. But I didn't care about the diamonds. What mattered was how I felt standing there. Composed. Seen. I turned slowly, letting them look. Letting them all see me. Clarissa's cronies, the same girls who'd giggled when Russell mocked me, were staring now, but not with amusement. With awe. Confusion. Maybe even fear. I didn't need revenge. I needed them to realize that I'd always been more than what they reduced me to. Damien leaned close. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and this time, I meant it. The crowd shifted again. The tension didn't leave, but it reshaped. No longer laughter at my expense. Now it was caution. Uncertainty. Because the girl they tried to humiliate? She wasn't walking out. She was standing tall. And now, they were the ones unsure of their place. If the last scene had cracked the surface, this was where the whole damn floor gave way. People were still talking, not to us, never directly, but to each other in urgent whispers. The same guests who'd smiled at Russell's toast were now checking their phones, refreshing headlines, piecing together who Damien really was. Not the eccentric tech guy they'd heard rumors about. Not the reclusive investor. No, tonight, they were seeing the man who could tilt the balance of their carefully curated world. Russell tried to recover. Tried to laugh it all off like it was just a misunderstanding. "Well," he said loudly, lifting his glass like the toast was still going. "No hard feelings. Families fight. Let's not ruin Clarissa's night over a little squabble." That's when Damien pulled out the final document. The envelope was thinner than the others, but somehow heavier. He handed it to Russell again, with that same quiet calm. Russell squinted at it. "What now?" "Foreclosure notice," Damien said. The room went dead still. "What?" Clarissa said, taking a step forward. "What do you mean foreclosure?" "On Russell's commercial headquarters," Damien said, turning slightly toward the audience as if he were giving a keynote. "It's been leveraged for nearly 2 years, 3 different credit facilities, all heavily dependent on temporary collateral value. Unfortunately, Clarissa's engagement party, the one with the branded silk napkins and imported orchids, was financed through those facilities. Clarissa looked at her father, confused. Wait, you used the office as collateral? For this? Russell waved a hand. It's temporary. Normal liquidity delay. You wouldn't understand. I understand enough, Damien said. Which is why I acquired the notes through a private investment channel 2 weeks ago. As of this morning, I control the building. Russell blinked hard. You're bluffing. Damien held up a scanned copy of the signed deed transfer. Call your lawyer. I'll wait. Clarissa's face twisted like she couldn't decide if she was going to scream or faint. You're ruining everything, she hissed at me, her voice cutting through the stillness like broken glass. I didn't move. You ruined it the moment you decided I didn't belong. I built that company, Russell snapped. You can't just take it away. You didn't build it, Damien said, cool and quiet. You inherited it. And then ran it into the ground trying to buy respect with money you didn't have. That hit hard. Not just for Russell, but for the room. Several heads turned. I saw a man in a navy suit discreetly slip away through a side exit. One of Russell's investors, probably. Clarissa's fiancé cleared his throat. Is this true? He asked, not to her, but to Damien. Clarissa froze. What does that matter? You're supposed to support me. The fiancé didn't answer. He looked at her like he was seeing someone else entirely. Her voice rose. This is a setup. Leah did this. You planned this. I finally spoke. No, I said quietly. I showed up in a borrowed dress and tried to be part of my own family. You're the one who turned me into a target. You think this makes you better than me? She spat, eyes wild now. You think throwing money around and marrying a rich man erases what you are? I didn't marry him for money, I said. I married him because he sees me. She looked like she wanted to slap me, but instead, she turned on the crowd. Are you all just going to stand there? They were. Because the tide had turned. The same women who used to laugh behind my back were now silent. The same men who toasted Russell were shifting uncomfortably, checking their watches. Even the staff was watching. One of the waiters, a young guy in a bow tie, gave me the smallest nod when our eyes met. Clarissa took a shaky breath and turned to her fiancé. Tell them, she said. Tell them this isn't real, that none of this matters. But he was already backing away. Excuse me, he mumbled, and walked out without another word. Clarissa stood there, alone in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by people, and yet completely isolated. For once, there was no spotlight, no applause, just the collapse of a paper empire built on arrogance. Damien looked at me. You ready? I nodded. Not to leave, not yet, but to stand here, right here. As the dust settled around us, Clarissa didn't follow her fiancé. She just stood there, in the center of the room, blinking like the lights had gotten too bright. She looked stunned, betrayed, like her world had tilted and she couldn't find the floor. Maybe it had. The silence stretched longer than any music ever could. No one moved. No one dared. The room that had once cheered her now watched in awkward quiet, pretending to sip drinks they'd forgotten they were holding. She finally looked at me. You did this, she said, low and sharp. You planned all of this. I stepped forward, slow and steady. My heels clicked against the museum floor, each step louder than the last. No, I said. You did this the moment you decided humiliating me was part of your party theme. Clarissa let out a small, bitter laugh. You couldn't stand that it was my night. I tilted my head. You mean the night where your father publicly shamed me? The one where your fiancé couldn't even fake respect for your guests? The one where you and your friends whispered about me like I was the help? She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. Let's be honest, Clarissa. You never wanted family at this party. You wanted props. People to smile, to praise you, to post you. You didn't want me here unless I stood in the background and clapped on cue. You don't get it, she said, voice cracking. You've always been small, quiet, convenient. You don't belong in this world. I stepped in closer. And yet, here I am. Clarissa's hands curled into fists. I worked for this life. Did you? I asked softly. Or did you just inherit a spotlight and assume the rest of us should stay in the dark? Her face flushed. I glanced at the guests, at the people trying hard not to look too interested, even though their eyes were glued to us. You know what's funny? I said, louder now. I never wanted revenge. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came because, after years of being ignored, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could be part of something again. A pause. But I was wrong. I took a breath, the words tumbling out now, unafraid. I spent most of my life being quiet, letting people talk over me, letting people call my mother's death a scandal instead of a tragedy, letting you all rewrite the story to make yourselves feel cleaner. I looked at Clarissa. You want to know what tonight gave me? She didn't answer. Clarity. The necklace around my neck caught the light as I turned slightly. It wasn't the sparkle that made the room shift again. It was the way I stood. Straight. Calm. Done apologizing for existing. You could have had me in your corner, I said gently. All you had to do was act like family. Once. Just once. Clarissa blinked fast, trying not to cry. Her pride was still fighting. And me? I was finally free of it. I reached for Damien's hand and gave it a light squeeze. Then the music changed. A jazz melody drifted in, soft, familiar, old. My heart caught for a second. Billie Holiday. My mother's favorite. I smiled, just barely, and stepped to the center of the room. Not to dance. Not to gloat. Just to exist. Fully. Publicly. Clarissa watched me like she couldn't understand how I was still standing. How I hadn't shattered after everything they'd thrown at me. But the truth was simple. They'd broken me a long time ago. And I'd rebuilt myself without them. Piece by piece. Tonight wasn't about payback. It was about proof. That I never needed their approval. Only their absence. Damien offered his arm, and I took it, steady and without hesitation. We began walking toward the exit, not rushing, not storming out. Just leaving like we owned the right to go whenever we wanted. Which, now, we did. The room had grown still again, but not the same way as before. It wasn't shock anymore. It was recognition. The kind that creeps in slowly when people realize they just watched the entire balance of power shift and hadn't even seen it coming. We passed Clarissa still standing near the center, eyes red but jaw locked, her fists trembling at her sides. Her engagement looked like a punchline now. Her fiancé was gone. Her father's empire had been outed as hollow. And she, the queen of the evening, looked more like a statue than a bride-to-be. We walked past my Aunt Sylvia, who wouldn't meet my eye, and Uncle Paul, who cleared his throat and looked down at his drink like it had answers. We passed Clarissa's friends too, the ones who'd laughed behind manicured hands earlier in the night. Their smiles had vanished, replaced by stiff faces that couldn't quite decide if they were impressed or terrified. Then, from the far end of the room, came the sound. Clap. Just one. Crisp. Intentional. I turned my head. It was a woman in black, one of the older staff members, a co-check attendant I remembered from my first step inside the museum that evening. She had watched everything, unnoticed in the corner. Now she was clapping. Slowly. Deliberately. Then came another, a young man near the hors d'oeuvres table, still wearing a server's apron. He joined in, his expression unreadable but steady. Then a third. It wasn't the people with designer watches or high-net-worth portfolios. It wasn't the ones who'd toasted to family and laughed as Russell tore a bracelet from my wrist. It was the ones who worked. The ones who had stood in the background. The ones who saw everything. And now, they were applauding. I swallowed hard. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. But it was real. People began to look around, unsure if they should join in or stay silent. Most chose silence. But not Damien. He paused as we passed Clarissa's table, the royal court, as they once called it, and let go of my arm for a second. I didn't stop him. He leaned down, voice low but firm. You should have just left her alone. Clarissa said nothing. Her hands were clenched around the edge of the table now, knuckles white. Beside her, Russell looked, broken, hollow, like a man who had just realized he couldn't bluff his way out of a reckoning. My step-aunt, his second wife, the one who always wore pearls and always looked through me like I was glass, sat frozen, clutching her wine glass like a rosary. She looked pale, not embarrassed, terrified, like she knew what came next. And then it was me who spoke, quiet, calm. I forgive you. Clarissa looked up sharply, as if waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. I'm not saying it for you, I added. I'm saying it for me. And I meant it. Not because they deserved it, but because I wasn't carrying them with me any longer. Their cruelty, their silence, their judgment. None of it came with me past that door. We turned and walked again. Through marble arches. Beneath glass ceilings. Past a crowd of people who didn't know whether to look away or bow their heads. And the applause, soft, steady, from the quiet corners, followed us all the way to the exit. I didn't need their cheers. Just their silence. And finally, they gave it to me. Outside, the night had cooled. The Chicago skyline rose in glittering silence beyond the museum steps, and the city buzzed faintly in the distance, taxis passing, a train murmuring blocks away, the hum of real life that didn't care about socialite scandals or ruined engagement galas. Damien stood beside me, already opening the door to the sleek black car that waited at the curb. No driver in sight, just him, holding it like a gentleman out of another time. I didn't get in right away. I turned instead, looking back at the building behind me. The Grand Museum, once towering and intimidating, now looked small. Not physically, but emotionally. Like something I'd finally outgrown. I could still see the faint lights through the windows, the silhouettes of people inside, heads together, mouths moving in whispers. Trying to make sense of what had just happened. Trying to explain to themselves how Leah, the quiet girl, the girl with no status, no inheritance, no clout, had walked in alone and walked out untouchable. Damien didn't rush me. I glanced at him, and he raised an eyebrow. "You good?" I nodded once, then looked at the museum again. "It used to scare me," I said softly. "Not this building. All of it. Them. The family. I used to think something was wrong with me because I didn't fit." He didn't interrupt. "But now I see it," I said. "They weren't better than me. They just had louder microphones." He smiled faintly. "And a very short-term memory." I chuckled. It felt strange, laughing after everything, but it was real. Then he added, "Want me to buy the guest list? Just for fun?" I smirked. "Why? So you can send them condolence baskets? Or NDAs?" I shook my head, laughing quietly now. "No. Let them talk. They will." "Good," I said. "They've learned enough." I stepped into the car, smoothing my dress as I settled in. Damien closed the door behind me, circled around, and slid into the driver's seat. We didn't speak at first. The city rolled by outside the windows as he eased us into the traffic, headlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I leaned back and finally breathed. Not with tension. Not with relief. With release. The kind that comes after a long exhale you didn't even realize you'd been holding. Tonight didn't make me new. It just reminded me I'd never been broken. I was never lesser. Never disposable. Just underestimated. And now? Now they knew better. As we drove off, the museum behind us shrinking into the darkness, I didn't look back again. There was nothing left there for me.